Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to talk to you about my idea of what nature's best hope is. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients. And all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans would not survive any of those drastic changes. There is some good news, and that is that that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects. We can save our birds. We can save nature itself. But to do that, we're going to have to change the way we landscape. And we're really going to have to change the way we landscape soon. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support systems that nature delivers us. We call them ecosystem services. Here are just a few of the things that plants do that we depend on. Like oxygen, plants are producing oxygen. They're cleaning water and slowing its journey to the sea where it's too salty to use. Enormously important ecosystem service today is capturing carbon, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, taking the carbon molecule and building their tissues out of it, but then pumping the extra carbon in the ground. Soil scientists now tell us that our soils can hold 7 times the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere right now. We just have to get it into the soil, and that's what plants are doing every day. They're building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they're preventing floods, dampening severe weather, converting sunlight to food. If we lost plants, we'd have to eat sunlight. Be difficult. What do animals do for plants? They provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services, just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because we need more ecosystem services today than ever before because we've got so many of us on this planet. Now we do have parks and we have preserves, and they're certainly valuable, but they are too small. There's too few of them. They're too isolated from each other to perform all of these jobs, which is why we're in the 6th great extinction today. Not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to save nature, actually reconstruct it where we've torn it asunder, where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every single year, but thrive. Where should we do that? Where should we start? Well, we're going to have to include private property in our conservation efforts because most of the land is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 95% of Texas is privately owned. If we don't do conservation on private property, we're going to fail. When I talk about conservation, I'm not really using the word correctly. We certainly want to conserve any areas any natural areas that remain, but I'm really talking about rebuilding those that we've already wrecked. A form of restoration, I will admit, it's not going to look like it did before we wrecked it, but it can be close. What we want to do is reunite enough of those specialized interactions so that we're rebuilding functional ecosystems again. But to do that, we have to start with the most important species. Not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally, so we have to start with the critical ones, and we can add others later on. 2 groups that we cannot do without include the flowering plants, and of course the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. They are capturing energy from the sun and turning it into food through photosynthesis. Then they're storing that energy in largely their leaves. Well, now we got the energy from the sun in plants. We have to get that to animals or we're not going to have any animals. So most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that have eaten plants. Most of those invertebrates are insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are enormously important in terms of transferring energy to animals. Caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars, we have failed food webs and then eventually failed ecosystems. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. So if we landscape in a way that does not have all of those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the factors contributing to bird declines that people are measuring. In the past, even currently, we think about our landscapes only in terms of aesthetics. We want to make them pretty, but we also have to make them ecologically functional now. So how do we add these caterpillars, these insects to our landscapes and keep the landscapes pretty? But yeah, you add caterpillars to landscapes by adding the plants that make those caterpillars, of course. And that seems pretty easy, but there is a catch, and that is that most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which plants we add. We have to add the ones that do make a lot of caterpillars, and we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy. Well, this is where specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants are highly specialized on particular plant lineages. Every single plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses, and insects cannot adapt to all of them. So they pick one or two lineages that are really similar in the defenses they're using, and they develop specialized adaptations that allow them to get around those defenses, to circumvent them. Specialized enzymes allow them to store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. Behavioral adaptations, life history adaptations allow them to minimize their exposure to those compounds. It takes a long period of evolutionary history for all those adaptations to fall into place. And once they do, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant. So if you take out the milkweeds from your yard and replace them with hostas, the monarch can't eat the hostas. So what does the monarch do? It disappears. And that's why when we landscape with plants that are not native to this country, and when many of those plants escape and become serious invasive species in our natural areas, we're devastating local food webs because the insects that run those food webs, particularly the caterpillars, cannot eat most of those plants. So all I'm saying here is that plant choice matters when we're trying to reconstruct food webs, trying to rebuild ecosystems, put nature back together again. We've got to choose the plants that allow us to do this, or it's not going to work. World Wildlife Fund says that we have lost 2/3 of wildlife from planet Earth since 1970. So these are scary headlines, and they're discouraging an awful lot of people. It makes you want to just jump off the Earth and find a planet that's not already wrecked. But this one isn't already wrecked. We can fix it. We can turn this around, but we've got to put those life support systems, those plants back. And when you do, life returns. So don't give up. But I know what you're thinking. So will it work in smaller properties in, say, suburbia? And that's a good question. Let's go to Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres. They're in the middle of a development. All their neighbors have the big yards with the big lawns. Their property was covered with bush honeysuckle. So the first thing they did, that's Amur honeysuckle from China. First thing they did was get rid of that. Then they planted 75 species of native plants, put in a water feature they call a bubbler. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that have used their yard. And they're up to 149 bird species, including 35 warbler species. If any of you are birders, you know that's a good number. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. What about urban yards? So that tower back there is O'Hare Airport. They're right next to the airport. Over here is Kennedy Expressway. They have 1/10 of an acre. 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. And they're not connected to any natural area at all. So it's a pretty 1/10 of an acre, but it's a little island. Well, they did the same thing, though. They got rid of their invasive plants. They put in 65 species of native plants, including a water feature for the birds. And then they sat back and started to count the birds using their property. And they're up to 120 species of birds, including a woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Chicago. There it is, sitting right there. There's 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way. And we do want to succeed in a big way. And one of the most important is we've got to reduce the area that we now have in lawn. We've got more than 40 million acres of lawn nationwide. And that's a 2005 statistic. So, you know, it's more than that at this point. dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Now, I know we need lawn in order to advertise our high status, and we need lawn to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we were to cut that area of lawn in half? What if we were to take areas like this and replant them like this? I got this picture just not long ago from Dan Getman in Missouri, I think, showing he's doing exactly that. He's putting plants back into a large lawn area. Well, that would give us 20 million acres to put towards conservation. And if we do it at home, we can create a new national park that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. It'll be large. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park be the biggest park in the country. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, join a growing movement to convert that 20 million acres of lawn and other parts of natural areas where you live. Go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and put in your information for your location, where you live in your county, the amount of area that you are going to convert to natives, you're pledging to convert to natives, or you already have converted to natives, and your little piece of the action will pop up on the map. The object is to make this idea go viral so that so many people do it, it just becomes part of the national culture. And then we can see all the areas that people are restoring pop up on the map. What plants should we put in the area that was once lawn? Well, some of them, I'm going to argue, have to be keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is. This is a Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. When you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, when you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because the keystone plants are making most of the food. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food that drives those food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold up that house. They're essential. The house is not going to stand up without those 2x4s. You cannot build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last 100 years. You're not through building your house when you have your 2x4s in, but they're an essential part of it. So the question is no longer simply, are natives better ecologically than non-natives? On average, they certainly are, but I can build an all-native landscape that supports very little if I choose the plants that support very little. The question really is, do we want to use the most powerful native species, the ones that are supporting the most pollinators and the most caterpillars, or not? What's contributing more than anything else? It's one of our oaks. In the mid-Atlantic states, oaks support 557 species of caterpillars, over 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. Oaks are the most powerful keystone plant in 84% of the counties in which they occur. If you want to find out what the keystone plants are where you live, go to National Wildlife Federation website, Native Plant Finder, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of both woody and herbaceous plants ranked in terms of their importance in your county will pop up. And this is what a typical list looks like. It's much bigger than this, but I cut it off because I ran out of room. So oaks typically number one there. Notice I say native oaks, native cherries, native willows, native birches. If I go to the nursery and I say, I want to buy a cherry, and I don't specify which cherry I want to buy, they're going to sell me an ornamental cherry from Asia. If I want to buy a willow, they're going to sell me a weeping willow from Turkey. If I want to buy a birch, they're probably going to sell me a European birch. You've got to specify that you want a native member of these powerful genera, because if you don't, you're going to have 68% fewer caterpillars. Caterpillars can't eat the non-natives as well. We've done that experiment. These are the most important herbaceous plants particularly in the Northeast. Goldenrod's way up there. The various genera, the asters, were broken up into. Perennial sunflowers very high. With those three groups of plants alone, not only will you make lots of caterpillars, goldenrod support 110 species of caterpillars, you're also going to support the specialist bees the best. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put keystone plants in our yard. We're going to attract lots of insects to our little ecosystem, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which is not the goal, of course. There's a lot of research coming out that strongly suggests that one of the major causes of insect decline is light pollution. And these are all the ways that lights are killing our insects at night. To me, believe it or not, this is good news. It is good news because we have to turn around insect decline. Remember, they're the little things running the world. We've already lost 45% of the insects on planet Earth. Not a good idea. If we can turn that around by simply flicking a switch, turning out our lights at night, we're getting off easy. But I know what you're going to say. Oh, I can't turn the light out over my front porch or over my garage because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on it so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. Yellow LED bulbs, the best, because yellow wavelengths are the least attractive to nocturnal insects. If we were to switch out our white bulbs for yellow bulbs overnight, we would save millions of insects and also millions of dollars because our LEDs are, of course, a lot more energy efficient. So we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to use keystone plants. We're going to turn out our lights. Then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come kill all of our insects. Booming business around the country. Mosquito Joe is undoing everything I've been talking about for the last 15, 20 years. But he says it's okay because this is a natural product. And he's right. It's a natural product. It's pyrethroids, the same compound in chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural product too. So that's not a good argument. He also says it only kills mosquitoes. And I wish he was right. I really wish he was right. But he's not right. It kills all the insects that it comes in contact with. I don't know if you saw the headlines 2 falls ago, not last fall, but the fall before that. Big monarch kills when they flew through Mosquito Joe. Hundreds of monarchs dead on the ground. The big thing is it doesn't work. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. That's too hard. In order to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of them. Mosquito Joe kills between 10 and 50% of the mosquitoes. So it's not even close to being effective. And that's why he has to keep coming back and keep charging you. If you want to control mosquitoes, you control them in the larval stage. Get a bucket, fill it full of water, put in a handful of straw or hay, and let it ferment for a couple of days. Of course, you're doing this in the warm part of the year. What you're doing is building up populations of diatoms and algae, and that's what mosquito larvae eat. And that brew becomes an irresistible attractant to females that are going to lay their eggs. The female mosquitoes lay their eggs in your bucket. Those eggs will hatch. Then you put in a mosquito dunk. Go to the hardware store, get a mosquito dunk. This is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic dipteran. And the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is mosquitoes. It's extremely targeted. This costs $9, by the way, so it's also inexpensive. Targeted, if a dragonfly gets in here, it doesn't hurt it. If your dog licks it or a bird drinks it, doesn't hurt it at all. You might put a big fat screen over this so that chipmunks and things don't fall in and drown. But otherwise, it's an effective mosquito control, particularly if everybody does it. That is only gonna kill mosquitoes. Fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows those all-important caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And this is just an example where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. Caterpillar eats the leaves, spins a cocoon, hangs from a branch, and then it emerges as an adult, and then it does it all over again. And I wish everything did that, but most species don't. 480 of those species, 94%, drop from the tree after they're finished growing and wiggle their way beneath the ground to pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. And we mow and compact our soil to the point where it's rock hard and too hard for those caterpillars to get underground. So the way we landscape in so many places becomes an ecological trap. Any adult moth that lays its egg here, the caterpillar will grow, but then drop down and die. I am convinced the way we landscape under our trees is another major cause of insect declines around the country. And of course, the cement landscape is even less of an option. This is what most people do. They have a tree in a lawn, and we're just starting to measure what happens, how well caterpillars do in a situation like this. But I guarantee they're going to do better in a situation like this, where you have a tree and then a layered landscape, maybe a dogwood here, native azalea, ferns, ground cover. It's a safe site. The caterpillars drop down, can easily get beneath the surface of the soil. It's not compacted. Nobody's going to step on them. Nobody's going to mow them. They can spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under here. Development will be very high. I'm not trying to discourage people from gardening. I'm trying to increase the amount of gardening. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. Put big beds around your trees. They become safe sites. Liberally use your ground covers like wild ginger or May-apples or foam flower or ferns. They're all safe sites. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia, and these are red maple trees. Any caterpillar developing in these red maple trees will drop down into this fern bed and be able to complete its development. So even though this is the middle of a city, we can do a lot better in terms of encouraging those caterpillar populations with the way we landscape under our trees. It's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of native plants. So if we get more native plants into our landscapes, we can support better food webs, even though we have some non-natives. Can we use natives formally? Of course we can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design. She sent this to me last year, taken from a drone 400 feet up. This is a large garden, and you don't get more formal than that. And every plant in that garden is a native plant. So formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. And I guess it's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden and do a typical suburban lot like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Just put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. It tells people that's not just a pile of weeds that you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. It's servicing a number of species of bees. Not very big, but if everybody does it, it would help a lot. Remember why we need pollinators. The media will tell you it's because they pollinate 1/3 of our crops. It's actually about 1/12 of our crops. And I don't like that argument because people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. You do need pollinators. They pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. Forget the crop argument. We need pollinators everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. What about this? A Drew Latham design, much bigger. Imagine the amount of life supported here versus the amount of life supported here. Seems like a no-brainer. So I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And this is an important one. We've come to think of nature as optional. We like it. We like to visit it, but it's not essential, which means when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, which is always, then nature takes a back seat. Went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out. There's this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save nature, save wildlife, so that future generations can enjoy it. And I understand that. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for the national park system. We want to save these wonderful places so that future generations can appreciate them. But that reinforces that idea that nature is there just for entertainment. Entertainment is not essential, but nature is. We need nature so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. Now, we've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. We talked about this, but by restricting conservation just to areas where there's not a lot of humans, we're going to fail if we do that, because those areas are too few, too isolated, too small to support the amount of nature that we actually need. David Quammen has an excellent analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That's a functional Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That is 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting effectively like a Persian rug. And that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. I hate that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth without ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our roadsides, including our corporate landscapes, even including much of our agriculture. So we need to put the plants back, folks. We need to glue our rug back together again to increase overall functionality, not just to make biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats, but to create viable habitats where we've destroyed them. When we put the plants back for the first time in modern history, we humans are going to coexist with nature. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, few conservation biologists, few ecologists. For some reason, we did not see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why, because everybody on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. Why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility of good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, the Cherokee elder, once said that the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. Mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with those mindsets, you're taught them. And we're very good at teaching this one. We have been terrible at teaching our kids about their obligations to Earth stewardship and our peers about their obligations. That doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. The Earth has tremendous problems right now, and most people feel absolutely powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can put in a pollinator garden. One person can use keystone plants. One person can get rid of the invasive plants that are on their property. We didn't even talk about that. One person can turn out their lights. One person can totally revitalize their local ecosystem and then contribute to the greater ecosystem rather than degrade it. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. You get depressed. Just think about your piece of the planet. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you focus. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park, help a preserve. They're all underfunded, all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So as a property owner or a volunteer, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own fate. I think I've convinced my grandkids that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thank you very much.